Hello, Psych 101 students, and welcome to Learning Objective 1 of Module 1 of Chapter 1. Okay, so in this first learning objective, we're going to look at psychology as a science and about how psychology helps you develop your critical thinking skills. We'll start with a couple of definitions here, looking at the terms subjective versus objective. So, your own thoughts on any topic are, you know, your own personal thoughts, and they're considered subjective. It is, based on your own intuition or your own belief or opinions. But in order to gain any kind of scientific insight into a topic, we need to take an objective or impersonal approach, one that applies to many people. It isn't just coming from one person's thinking, own subjective personal thinking. So, in order to do this, psychology uses the scientific method. And this is what makes psychology a science. It is a method of study that is used. If you ask, the common person on the street for a list of sciences, not that many of them would come up with psychology. They would list things like physics and biology and I don't know, maybe geology or medicine as being sciences. Because, these are some of the things that they may have studied or learned about in science class back in school. But what makes something as what makes something a science is not what it studies. It doesn't matter if you're studying a frog in biology or a rock in geology or drugs in medicine or physics, something like speed of light in physics. I mean, it is not the subject matter that makes it a science. It is the fact that all of these disciplines use the scientific method, the same scientific method that psychology uses. And so psychology, it turns out, is just as much of a science as any of these, normally considered these other topics are normally considered, the hard sciences. Um, so this leads to our definition of psychology here as the scientific study of mental activity and behavior, which depend on the processing in the brain. And if the one thing I'm stressing here that I want you to take away from it is the scientific study. Um, it is an objective approach based on evidence that is used to learn about mental activity and behavior. And this is a pretty broad area. I mean, basically everything that we think and everything that we do relates to psychology. I mean, anything you can think of from your typical day, whether you're eating lunch, yes, psychologists study eating. I mean, if you're walking to school, psychologists have studied walking. I mean, if you're daydreaming, yes, it's been studied. Um, I did research on looking at expertise in chess players, and comparing novice versus expert chess players. It's any activity, whether it's physical activity, mental activity. I mean, it all falls under the umbrella of behavior or thinking. So mental activity, behavior, it covers everything you do. And so psychology is a huge area. I mean, this is why we have so many different um, subdivisions of psychology, such as developmental and or biological psychology or cognitive psychology or um, neuropsychology, um, social psychology. I mean, anyways, just to name a few areas, because it is such a huge area of study. And once again, psychology is a science because of the methods that are used to study mental activity and behavior. We refer to scientific study as empiricism. It's when research is conducted using an objective, evidence-based approach. So when you read about psychologists have found this, or psychologists have found that, or they have this theory or this hypothesis, it's not somebody just thinking like, oh, this is the way things are based on my experience. It is always based upon evidence. And often, we find evidence in psychology that goes against common perceptions or intuitions. And so the evidence may find that, something that contradicts people's assumptions. I'll give you an example on this next slide here. So, one common assumption is that if a menu lists calories, then people will make healthier choices. Oh, they can see that, this is a healthier choice than one option is versus another. And that would have actually been my assumption before I learned about this research, but it turns out to be untrue. In a well-controlled study with a lot of subjects, they found that listing calories on a menu does not relate to long-term changes in the food purchases. So even though we think it makes sense that people would make better choices, it turns out not to be true. And this is the difference between, a subjective opinion or a subjective belief versus an objective, scientifically based, empirically based finding. In psychology, we rely on what well-controlled studies tell us is the truth of human behavior and thinking. So psychology relies on empirical research and not subjective thinking. Psychology can help develop critical thinking skills. Once you get further into psychology, and when you start to learn how to do proper research, you learn how to systematically evaluate information in order to reach conclusions based on the evidence provided. So critical thinking it's a set of skills for evaluating all claims in an open-minded and careful fashion. Once you develop good critical thinking skills, you can learn to apply them to any claims that are presented to you. There are three major steps in thinking critically. You want to, first of all, consider the source. Is it a believable source? Secondly, is there strong evidence? What is the actual evidence that's presented? And third, are there others that believe the same thing, particularly other experts that agree on the same thing? If it's just, one person making a claim, I mean, and no one supports it, it's more likely to be untrue. What you want to find is that different experts arrive at the same conclusion based on different studies. And as we see converging evidence, then it makes a claim more believable. Let's take this as an example here, this picture. There was an article on rage rooms where you pay some money and you can go in and break things, as it says here, when you're stressed, with the implication being that, by going in there when you're feeling stressed out, you can vent your stress and it will calm you and make you more relaxed because you get your stress out in this rage room. Well, let's evaluate it using critical thinking. So first of all, remember the first step is the source of the claim believable, and we want to first look at who is providing information about the claim. And in the case of the Rage Room article, it was published in USA Today. Yeah, okay. So when you look at news or media sources, they're not the best sources for scientific claims. Um, as it says here, credible sources in psychology are usually experts with an advanced degree in psychology. Probably the person writing the article on the Rage Room is not an expert with an advanced degree in psychology. What you want to try to get to sources, get to reputable sources that where that the findings have been checked by others, and this is where scientific journals come into play. To publish an article in a reputable scientific journal is a long and hard process. Um, it gets reviewed by other experts in the field. Some of the top people in a particular field will review an article before it ever is allowed into the journal. So the the journal articles that you find in reputable journals, um, they have gone through a whole process of revisions, questionings, and it's all been done with people that are the top experts. It's a process I've been involved in myself, and it is, like I said, it is a long and arduous process. It takes months from the time you finish an article before it'll ever be accepted and published. Um, well, let me look back at that Rage Room article. And once again, I told you it was from USA Today. Well, who who were the people they were quoting the most in the article? Turns out that it was the owners of the Rage Room. The owners were saying how it was great for angry people and stressed out people to relieve their stress. Well, that's not a particularly good source. They are not an objective source, obviously. They are making subjective claims. Well, let's go on to number 2 here. What is the evidence for the claim? First of all, is the evidence empirical? Once again, empirical means that it's it is based on objective findings where there has been some kind of controlled study that's been conducted with many people in order to find out what I don't want to use the word true, but what the most likely true findings are. Occasionally, even a well-controlled study could come up with an answer that turns out to be false later, but in most cases, uh, um, empirical evidence is what you want. You want to see that there's been some kind of study conducted, and that what you don't want to rely on, obviously, for critical thinking is just intuition, beliefs, or opinions. Um, this is what I talked about in the introduction to chapter 1 with I talked about driving with a cell phone. I'm sure that girl Kelsey, who ended up being killed in that car crash, her intuition was that she was perfectly fine talking on the phone while she drove. That was her personal gut feeling or personal belief or her personal opinion. But it was not obviously an objective fact. And as I told you at the start in that last video, studies show that you are more likely to be in an accident if you're distracted on the phone. Well, in this Rage Room article, they also talked to customers who, you know, kind of reiterated what the owners were saying. The customers were saying, "Yeah, I feel less stressed after I leave the rage room. I feel like, I get my anger out. I'm calmer. But once again, what we what we, what we believe about our own selves often isn't true either, because you kind of you would go into this rage room expecting to feel calmer when you leave. And so that's going to be, if somebody interviews you, you're going to say, yeah, I do feel calmer, because you were just expecting to be calmer. And so we can't trust people's personal experiences. That's just their own, opinion that they're somehow less stressed or calmer. What you want to do, of course, is, once again, do some kind of empirical evidence. Would it not make sense to measure people's stress levels before they go into the rage room and then after? And there are certainly ways to do this. That is what a critical thinker would consider. That surely somebody must have thought of doing this study and gathering empirical evidence on the subject. Let's go on to number 3 here. Do other believable sources agree about the claim? I'm sorry, my voice is quite hoarse today, but I'll try to drink some lemon tea or something for next time. But well, it turns out that in the Rage Room article, they did get one expert statement, and this was from a clinical psychologist. And his statement in the article was, "It is not particularly therapeutic for people who have anger problems." So you would think that this rage room is really meant for people that have anger issues to release their anger, but it turns out that this expert knew that psychological research has shown no support for beneficial effects of venting, which is what the rage room is. It's a type of venting. It turns out that when you vent anger in such a fashion, it actually increases the likelihood of later anger expression. So the rage rooms actually can work in the opposite way of what your intuition might tell you. It may actually make people more likely to have angry outbursts later. Okay, and so this is, once again, the critical thinking steps. And when you learn to live with these, it will allow you to make better judgments about what you read or hear from others, because you can learn to just automatically apply um, these these tools is the best word. So once again, just in review here, these are the 3 questions to ask yourself. As it says in this chart, if you get a no answer in even one of these categories, then you should reject the claim. Um, it doesn't matter if there's strong evidence. For instance, if the source is not believable, you can't really count on the evidence either. I mean, so you reject if you get one no. If you get even one unclear indicator, then you want to be cautious. Meaning unclear, meaning perhaps you don't know the source, or you're not aware of what what types of evidence they have, or you may not be aware of what other experts believe. So sometimes, until you learn more, you take a cautious state. Perhaps this claim is true, perhaps not. If you get a yes for all of them, you can accept it, and this is what is done in science, in any science. If you have a believable source who presents strong evidence, because they've done some kind of study or experiment, and other experts agree with the findings, then it makes sense to accept it as being a correct finding. And that will conclude learning objective 1, In our next video, we will look at the 5 interconnected domains. Bye for now.